All right, guys. Well, thanks for helping me out. Today we're going to be working on this worksheet in front of you called a question exploration guide. And have you guys ever done something like this in school before?
Yes, I have.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So it'll be familiar.
Yeah.
Okay. Every one of these is going to be different, though, based on the questions that we're asking, what we're trying to figure out. So your teacher let me know that you guys are doing a research project for school. What are you working on?
Global warming and social justice.
Yeah. Both of those?
Yes.
Wow.
At the same time?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
You
Global
didn't know
warming and
this?
social
Fun.
justice.
Listen.
At the same time?
So
Working on it.
those are big, important issues, and I'm sure you're finding lots of info online, in books, probably mostly Google,
Yeah.
stuff like that. I bet there's a lot of stuff that contradicts each other. Global warming exists, doesn't exist. Different levels of social justice.
Yes.
What we're going to do and use this worksheet for is kind of help break down the process of finding reliable information. We're going to focus on the critical question, which is the main part of this worksheet, in the first big box you have on your sheet. And I'm going to pose the question. We're going to work through everything else together. So this is not an assignment I'm having you do right now. This is kind of a working document. The critical question is, how does the scientific method aim to eliminate bias?
Ooh.
So if you guys could just write that down. You might have some general ideas about what we're talking about there. So how does the scientific method aim to eliminate bias? We're going to use different parts of this worksheet to kind of break it down, figure out what we're talking about, how it affects us, the real world. So what are some key ideas? I see two words in the question that we can talk about: bias and scientific method. I wrote both of those right down here. Let's quickly define them. What's a bias? What does it mean to be biased?
It's like to have your opinion influenced by whatever.
So
Just your opinion.
yeah, opinion. Everybody has different opinions, influenced by something. In the dictionary, the word that is mostly synonymous with it is prejudiced. So next to bias, let's write prejudiced. It means you have an opinion, one way or another, which may or may not be accepted, right? Everybody has different biases. What about the scientific method? Do you guys remember learning about that in school at all?
Kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
In science. So, do you remember what the scientific method is really?
Question, research, hypothesis,
Something about a conclusion.
experiment comes before the conclusion.
You guys are good.
And there's one more that
So
I
it's
think
a
it might have been
process.
analysis. But yeah, it's a process.
So just
we know what we're
this
talking about.
So the scientific method is a process to figuring out why or how something works or appears as it does. So yeah, there are 6 steps to it. Question. Research.
Oh yeah, that's one. I totally agree.
Hypothesis. What's the difference between a hypothesis and a question?
Hypothesis is an educated guess.
Oh, that's very true. Hypothesis is an educated guess. So based on some research, you have an idea as to why something is or how it is. After a hypothesis, you do experiment, analysis, spell that right, SIS, and then a conclusion. So these 6 steps help somebody figure out the question to something in the scientific world, in other areas too. So those are the basic vocab. We could add the definitions for hypothesis and analysis too. Sounds like you guys kind of have a good grip on that. What's the definition of analysis? What does it mean to analyze something?
And examine what you're not know. I don't know where I was starting with that sentence. It's not.
Yeah, like to examine, to figure out, to investigate. So after we get our key ideas, kind of define things that we might need to, words we might need to, and concepts we need to kind of wrap our heads around a little bit more, we move on to some supporting questions that help us figure out how does a scientific method aim to eliminate bias. So I'm just going to write them up here and we can discuss them for sake of time. So how about this? What kinds of bias we discussed that a bias is prejudice. How can you be biased or prejudiced?
Bias against people.
Biased against certain people, yeah.
Or like if you like a certain food and you're like, oh, I like this food and this food only, then
Yeah,
It's like Norwegian food.
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
Like maybe you're Norwegian and that's where your family comes from, so you grew up on Norwegian food,
Sure,
and then that's all you eat.
right. Lutefisk and Lefse, all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Like who eats a Burger King? We
So,
have Lutefisk.
So those are two different kinds of biases. One is not too troublesome. Most people wouldn't really worry about that, but prejudice against people, that can cause a lot of problems and does. So there's different kinds of bias. Another supporting question: when is the scientific method used? We kind of discussed that. Scientific method. Scientists use it or aim to use it as closely as possible to figure out something, because all these steps are kind of put in place to make sure they're doing everything right, getting all the information. Let's see. How can biases exist in science? Can a scientist still be biased, or can one of these steps be biased in some way? How could the question be biased?
You could be biased against having bias.
There you go.
But you also can't really be biased against having bias because everyone has a bias to some extent, and it's prejudice. So it's human nature.
Just blew my mind.
Okay, so does bias still exist despite the scientific method? Yeah, everybody's slightly biased. You could have a biased question. Your question right off the bat could be based in bias. The wording of it, the research. You could, if you're researching a certain trend in,
Like social justice.
yeah, you could say, well, everybody's doing fine because all these white people that I looked at, they're doing just fine compared to other groups. So your research, your groups that you're researching could be biased. Your hypothesis, from your unbiased or from your biased research, you might have an idea that sounds biased. The experiment, yes.
There are also things like with the tobacco companies, and they're like, oh, smoking does not cause lung cancer, except for the tobacco companies were funding the research for that.
That's a perfect
they're like-
example. So
Fun fact, Audrey. Where'd you get that from?
that's a good one. So the person or the group behind the scientific method, somebody who's funding it, could be biased. So yes, bias can still exist in science. So the last question I kind of had was, does the scientific method eliminate all bias?
No.
No, I mean, that's the aim. So back to our question, how does the scientific method aim to eliminate bias? There's all these steps, right? Kind of like checks and balances. You can't just jump from the question to the conclusion without going through all these, and if you do it in the right way, hopefully you get an unbiased answer, as unbiased as possible. So then we move on to our main idea. That's where we take our question and flip it into a statement. So, how does the scientific method aim to eliminate bias? We could say, let's see, how about by following the steps of the scientific method, word that now, can we eliminate bias? We can attempt to.
Eliminate bias, you're kind of forced to think about it logically
Okay, that's
instead
good.
of just having your own random opinions.
Yeah, that's good. We can attempt to eliminate bias. So the fifth part, how can we use this? How is this applicable to you? Why do you care about this right now? Maybe you don't, but.
Oh, I care.
Okay.
I care a great deals.
The projects that you're working on, like I said, there's so many sources, and one thing could say one thing, one thing could say another. So you can use this, your knowledge that following the steps of the scientific method can attempt to eliminate bias. Now you know that you could maybe go back backtrack what the scientist was doing throughout the research process and figure out if each step was as unbiased as it could be. So that gives you some power when you're choosing your sources, coming to conclusions on your own topic. I'm sure you guys have ideas that you want to kind of talk about and prove. And then also in science class, you guys have done this, it sounds like, yeah, like hands-on in science, so you're familiar with it.
Here's the science.
How about the real world? Is there an overall idea here, a real world use? I was thinking about one thing you said, not everybody is biased, right?
Mhm.
So we can just recognize everyone has a little bit of bias in them.
Some people have more bias and they're
Yeah.
kind of dumb and wrong.
Yep, and it can, cause you to think differently about them, or it's a good opportunity for discussions. So everyone has biased opinions, and it's really up to you guys to educate yourselves about your sources, where they're getting their information, how they're conducting their research, how the scientific method is being implemented, and overall, if you think, is it important to avoid bias in science
Yes.
as much as possible? Yeah,
Global warming.
right.
It's a bad thing. Some people think it's a myth and they're wrong.
So it's important
They're
to
wrong.
It's important to avoid bias as much as possible.
Yes.
So that's another real world lesson we learned. So using this format, we kind of took this question, broke it down, talked about the different elements of it, figured out how you guys can use it, why it's important in the world. So I'm hoping you guys can take these back to your class, show them to your teachers, use them for your project, and maybe, like you said, you've used these before. So, okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for your patience and your help.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Honestly, this was great. I want to do it again.
Oh, fantastic.